Yo, what's go, and welcome to the video. The Idol of the Moon has been going through a few changes over the past couple of days. The first change that happened was its tooltip was changed to reflect how the idol was actually working. It previously said that it was supposed to increase Moonfire's damage by 17%. It has not done that at all during Season of Discovery. It has always affected Moonfire by adding 33 spell power. So now that the tooltip has been changed, people are thinking that it is a nerf, but it never had its damage changed at all. It's just the tooltip changed to show how it's actually working. The second change that has rolled out is now it does affect Starfall and Sunfire, where previously it was only Moonfire that the idol was affecting. So now Sunfire, Moonfire gets kind of the same benefit. Starfall has a couple of different spell power coefficients attached to it, so I think it's definitely worth it to have this idol on every time you're pressing your Starfall button, especially if you're hitting more than one target. So let's take a little bit of look at the numbers of how much damage this idol is giving to these three spells. For Moonfire and Sunfire, the initial hit will have an additional 4.9335 damage increased with the spell power coefficient of 0.1495. So you take 33, multiply it by the spell power coefficient, and you get that number. So for the dot tick, spell power coefficient is 0.1302, with 33 spell power gives each dot 4.2966 extra damage. Sometimes you'll see an extra 4 damage, other times it'll be an extra 5 damage. I also included natural weapons, which is a 10% damage increase, which acts the same as Dark Moon Fair. So those kind of compound on top of each other. So if I took the 4.933, the initial hit added 10% and then added another 10% on top of that, now I have 5.9202 extra damage for the initial hit. And then for each dot, it's slightly over 5. And then both of those can crit. So if the initial hit crits and this idol's equipped and you have natural weapons and Dark Moon Fair in a raid environment, then the crit will add an extra almost 12 damage for the initial hit and a little over 10 damage per dot tick. So pretty nice to be able to have this idol on at the start of the fight at least and snapshot that extra damage into both of those dots. Now for Starfall, it has the star damage and the splash damage, and each of those has its separate spell power coefficient. For the initial stars, which can hit 2 targets, it's 0.3 for the spell power coefficient. So with 33 extra spell power, it's almost 10 extra damage per star per target hit. So it could be 19.8 extra damage, like 20 damage, 10 for each target if there's 2 or more, and 2 stars are going out per second. And for the splash damage, if it's a single target, there's only 1 instance of splash damage, and it's just over 4 extra damage per splash hit. And if you have 2 targets that are stacked, then there will be 4 instances of the splash damage. There'll be 1 on each target from normal, and then 1 splash to the other target. So you have 4 extra hits, and all 4 of those could crit. 1 could crit, 3 could non-crit. So I have the maximum amount of damage if all were to crit and you had at least 2 targets. Did the same thing with the dots. I added natural weapons and Dark Moon Fair, and you can see from these numbers here, I think it's pretty solid. This is per second that you're going to have an extra 12 damage per star, so maybe 24 damage if there's 2 targets. And if both of those crit, then that's 47 extra damage per second. And then the splash damage can kind of get really crazy if there's, 5, 6 targets and all of those targets are getting hit by that splash damage. So to me, I want to have this idol equipped for the entire duration of Starfall, because of how much damage it looks like it's going to be increasing. Now that we've looked at the damage, how is this going to affect our rotation? This can kind of go a few ways. I'm going to explain how I would use it if I was trying to idol swap and really min-max my damage in a raid. And while editing, I realized I left out an entire buff that's going to also increase its damage, and that is the Mark of Chaos from Warlocks. Once this debuff is applied, it will dynamically add extra damage to Starfall and both dots. If they're already applied, doesn't matter. That extra 11% damage will still get calculated in, just adding even more damage on top of what I've already shown. The suggested rotation from the Balanced Druid Discord is if you don't have Eclipse buffs pre-pull, which will be most of the time, I think, then you can pre-cast a Wrath into Star Surge, pop your trinkets and consumes, use Starfall, Moonfire, Sunfire, Insect Swarm, and then Starfire, Star Surge, Starfire, Wrath. You kind of rinse and repeat that last little bit and keep Insect Swarm up as it falls off. If I were to be idle swapping and try to get the most benefit from Starfall having the Idol of the Moon equipped, I think I would take this Insect Swarm cast and put this at the start of the fight after the Star Surge. So then now I can have, at the start of the fight, I can have the Idol of the Swarm equipped and then use this Insect Swarm cast to swap idols to the Idol of the Moon, and then now Starfall will have full duration, full uptime because it does not snapshot the idol. The idol must be equipped for it to affect Starfall. For Moonfire and Sunfire, it will snapshot the idol, but it doesn't matter because it's already going to be on, and these dots hopefully won't fall off at all during the fight. But every time Starfall comes off cooldown during the fight, I'm going to be trying to figure out some way. I don't know how yet. It might just be the same as this. I might just try to swap back to the Idol of the Swarm after all of these are applied. And then every 24 seconds, I will have Insect Swarm with the idol to increase its duration. Yeah, so once Starfall comes off cooldown, I'll be trying to idle swap back to the Idol of the Moon for those 10 seconds. Make sure that Insect Swarm is up for at least 10 seconds before it falls off, before I pop Starfall. Here's an example of how that rotation would play out. I can precast my Wrath. I already have my Idol of the Swarm equipped. I hit my Star Surge, my Insect Swarm, get the Starfall. I got my Idol of the Moon on now. Have both my dots up, and you can see Insect Swarm snapshotted its 24 seconds and kept it even though I swapped to Idol of the Moon. And yes, it can be kind of clunky. You can hit your Star Surge, and then if you hit your macro too soon, then it will swap your idol but not apply the Insect Swarm. So middle of the thing, you can see the middle of the GCD. I hit my Insect Swarm macro a little too soon, and then I swapped to the Idol of the Moon, but did not apply Insect Swarm. So you have to wait until kind of the very end of that GCD, and then hit it at the just right time, and then it will work no problem. It takes a little field to get used to, waiting and not spamming your macro. But eventually, you'll get used to it. It'll be second nature. And the last thing to talk about in this video is Starfall kind of bugged? I think that it might be. I'm not sure. Let's take a look at the tooltips, though, and see what you think. So if we compare Sunfire's tooltip to Starfall's, Sunfire, as everybody knows, benefits from and triggers all effects associated with Moonfire. But then if we look at the Starfall tooltip, it says benefits from and triggers most talents and effects that trigger or benefit from Moonfire. If we take a look at all the talents that Moonfire benefits, improved Moonfire does not benefit Starfall. Natural weapons does benefit Starfall. Nature's Reach does not. I think this one is a good thing because it means Starfall's range is only 30 yards. It doesn't get increased to 36 yards with Nature's Reach like Moonfire does. That's a positive, I think. It does get benefited from Vengeance, meaning all the critical damage is 100% extra, so 200% damage instead of 150% without this talent. It gets benefited by Moonglow. That is a positive, but it does not get benefited from Moon Fury. That's 20% base damage that Starfall doesn't get benefit from that Moonfire does. I know Starfall does crazy damage already, so having an extra 20% base damage would make it even stronger, especially once we get our tier 1 set bonus to reduce the cooldown by 50%. But to me, it definitely should benefit from these talents, even if the damage needs to get nerfed, just in order for these talents to make up that damage nerf. I don't know, I'm weird. That just makes sense to me that it would benefit from these. And then Moonkin Form. Moonfire costs 50% less mana and deals 50% more damage over time. So it does not benefit from that 50% less mana cost that Moonfire does while in Moonkin form. And the splash damage or initial damage does not benefit from that 50% extra damage either. That part's kind of fine, I guess. If it was just the splash damage that got an extra 50%, that'd be kind of cool. And the mana portion, not a big deal. We don't really have that much of a mana issue in a raid scenario. In PvP, though, it would be kind of nice if Starfall had 50% less mana cost to it because we were in Moonkin form. But this one I can let slide. And then the last thing that it does benefit from that Moonfire does is clear casting. So if we get a clear casting proc, pop Starfall, it will cost 0 mana. So that's it for this one. Let me know what you think about the idol changes. Are you going to be idol swapping, or does that feel too risky or not enough damage benefit to make it worth it to you? And what do you think about all the talents that Starfall doesn't get benefited from that Moonfire does?